Hey guys, we want to thank you all so much for coming. It's our just absolute pleasure and thrill to have Brooke Blanchard here for The Peacekeeper. It's her debut novel, and Brooke Blanchard is a member of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of the Chippewa, and is also a lawyer practicing. But we've got just a fantastic alternate history where the colonization of America by Europeans didn't happen. And we have people from the Ojibwa tribe are now ruling the Great Lakes area. And on top of that alternate history, you have just a thrilling murder mystery set in there. So you've got just so many wonderful things going on. And we're really excited to have her. And we want to thank all of you for being here too to support her. So please just give her a big hand.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. It's so good to see everyone and everyone watching online, and especially my family who've traveled here from Michigan and Florida and all the way from Santa Barbara and Sacramento. So thank you so much for coming. This is really exciting. So I'm Brooke Blanchard. I write under the name B.L. Blanchard. For reasons I can't even remember anymore. But The Peacekeeper is my first novel, and it's, as was mentioned, a murder mystery set in what I've been calling the Native American Wakanda, in never colonized North America. The plot features someone whose mother was murdered 20 years earlier, and a new murder occurs, and there's connections between the two, and he has to go from his small village of Bawitagon, which is what we know as Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario in our world, and has to go to the big city of Chicago, which we know as Chicago in our world, and the trials and tribulations along the way. So most of you here have read it or know what it's about, but that's a brief summary to those who are unfamiliar. I wanted to kind of start with just a quick sort of why I wrote it. The inspiration for it was I was driving to work one day, and I drive through the 163 through Balboa Park, and you start to see the tall buildings of downtown San Diego over there. And at one point, I kind of had a flash of a high-rise building that had a sort of what looked like a stained glass window, but in the shape of a dream catcher. And it made me think, oh, what if you had a never colonized North America? What might it look like in the 21st century? So spent about a year planning out the world. If you really want a thought experiment that will occupy you for an entire year plus, that's the one to pick. Lots of rabbit holes you can go down. And so I was kind of building a society from scratch. And there's so many ways that I think could have gone. I'm definitely not the first person to write about this concept. I hope I'm not the last. I shouldn't be the last, because there's so many ways it can go. And part of the reason I think it took so long to figure out what the world looked like is if you try to imagine why there was a world where overseas colonization had never happened. If I were to ask everyone in this room, I'd probably get a different answer from each person. And I think that tells you something. And that's why in the book, we actually never go into why it happened, in part because there's no point at which two characters could turn to each other and say, boy, aren't we lucky we dodged that bullet and we were never colonized by overseas powers and all of that. That doesn't work. But also because to me, it sort of doesn't matter the why. What matters is really, for a variety of reasons, it could have been avoided. I used to watch this show on, I think it was Discovery Channel, called Seconds from Disaster. It was a documentary show. And it would go over things like the Titanic, the Challenger, the Concorde, these big mega disasters, the Hindenburg, things like that. And they talk about it's never just one thing that happens that causes a major disaster. Their tagline was something like, it's a chain of critical events that have to happen. And by day, I'm a lawyer, and our malpractice carrier makes me sit through training every year where they say it's never just one thing that leads to malpractice. A lot of things usually have to go wrong, but they all seem very inconsequential at the time. It's not till they all line up that you realize, had you exercised your due care leading up to it, that you could have avoided it. So see, I do pay attention in those trainings. So, I wanted to kind of show how the why is sort of up to your imagination. I have my thoughts as to how it could have been avoided, but again, I don't quite think that's the point. So, like I said, now that we've come up with the world, and again, that took me well over a year to flesh out. I started doing it chronologically, starting from, start from 1491. What doesn't happen and how does it look? And you can go down a million million rabbit holes, and there are all these ripple effects. So I just decided, well, what do I want it to look like? We don't need to go into the how. We'll just kind of decide we're there. So I tore down Chicago and built it up from scratch in Chicago. And I had to do a little less heavy lifting with Sault Ste. Marie, which is in our world pretty small, at least on the Michigan side. On the Ontario side, it's actually a pretty good sized city. But if you're rebuilding Chicago into Chicago, there's a lot that you have to. So what I started with are, what are the values of this society? Because when you start from there, you go into a whole host of different things. So I decided on 3, that they would be community, sustainability, and responsibility. Now, nowhere in the book does anyone sit down and say this, but that's what guided me in the writing. So community, it's not about the individual, it's about the greater whole. That's a very big value in modern Ojibwa society. Sustainability, in the Chippewa and Ojibwa, there's the concept of 7 generations. For every decision you make, you think, how will it affect people 7 generations from now? That's the idea of sustainability. You're never thinking about the immediate, you're thinking about the long term. And then finally, responsibility, which is, I think, the crux of our hero Chibanashi's character arc, taking ownership of your actions and how they affect others. And that's his journey of learning how to take responsibility for the things he's done, but also accept what things he isn't responsible for and moving on from that. So to govern this, I'm a lawyer. You got to write what you know. So I created a whole new legal system. The legal system we all know and love in the United States, the criminal justice system is very much focused on punishment of the offender. I went to law school to become a public defender, did not end up becoming one, but that was my goal. So I took all the criminal procedure courses, all of the required ones, the electives, because that's what I thought I would do. And now I practice employment law. So that shows you never land where you think you will. Fun fact, as both a lawyer and practicing lawyer and enrolled tribal citizen, I statistically do not exist. So this is wonder of the world right here. But I thought the legal system, in part because I thought a mystery would be a good way to take you through this world. I also thought it was important to draw up a new legal system, because the legal system is really how a society does enforce its values. We criminalize things we don't like. We decriminalize things or legalize things we do like. Laws will change in reflection of society's values. I remember when I was in law school, I was a student member of the faculty appointment committee. So every time a prospective professor would come to our law school to interview to teach, they had to meet with a group of us, there are probably 10 or so, and we would just chat with them and give feedback as to how we thought this person would be in a class. And one of the ones that really stood out to me was someone who was coming in to become a tax professor. And every single one of us, myself included, probably especially me, thought, tax, this is going to be so boring. No one wants. But that person made me want to take a tax class. And because she said, taxation, if you want anything you need to know about a society, look at the tax system, because we don't tax things that are important to us. We give tax deductions to things we are valuable, and we tax things that we think are less valuable. And that was an interesting way to think about it. So I thought, well, no one wants to read a book about tax law, least of all me. And God knows I'm not going to write a book about the tax system. So I thought, well, the criminal justice system, what should it look like instead? And if you've read the book, it is not a judge, jury, plaintiff defendant system. It's a system called mediation. Now, those of you who practice civil law, this is very familiar to you, because this is how most civil cases get resolved. They get filed in a lawsuit, and most of the time it results in a negotiated settlement. Not always, but in the 8 years I was a trial attorney, I had one case go to trial. All the rest settled through some sort of manner like this. So I put together, so I thought if you have the society with these values that I had talked about, and you look at Ojibwa values, you would look at what is the goal. And I drew it based on 3 legal systems. One is the US civil system, which is the one I practice in. The other is the Japanese criminal justice system. The emphasis is on taking responsibility for wrongs, and that's really what's emphasized when the accused are questioned, and when the emphasis is on you really should confess if you are responsible, because you're making good with society. The last one that I based it on is Navajo Peacemaker courts, which is a system where it's focused on restitution. And for those of you who were lucky enough to not go to law school, restitution is a system of remedies where your focus is on making someone whole. So someone can't be unjustly enriched by what they've done. The goal is to put everyone back to where they were before the wrong occurred. And so that's the goal of the Navajo Peacemaker system. So you put these all together, drew up a legal system where you are everyone sits in a circle around a table, so you don't have the judge on high and everyone facing the judge, not each other, not talking to each other. They're speaking through the judge to a jury off to the side. Everyone's talking to each other. And that, again, the goal of that was to show an alternative method of legal justice. It's obviously not perfect. No legal system is. And in the book, we see it fail twice. But I wanted to go into a different way that criminal justice could be approached. So, and in showing something different, hopefully we can look at our own system and things that we think might be worth changing. So I've been asked to read a passage. I feel like I'm back in Catholic school and the priest is saying we're going to open the book of Blanchard. This is chapter what? I think chapter 5, page 57. I won't read for long, but I wanted to do something that I think kind of encapsulates the sort of the aims of this book as well as the themes of it, and also just a passage I'm particularly proud of writing. So in this scene, for those who have read it, it's spoiler free for those who haven't, but for those who have read it, this is shortly after the murder, and I'm not spoiling anything, we know there's a murder. And our hero, Chibanashi, is a peacekeeper. So instead of detective or police officer, peacekeeper. And this one hits close to home. After his mother was murdered and his father was sent to prison, which in this society is the worst possible sentence anyone could have, rarely used. The person they really leaned on was his mother's best friend, Meokwani. Well, she's the one who's murdered. So he's going to someone else who he finds helpful for advice, Wakui, the local medicine woman. And he's telling her about some very negative dreams he's had that are really more like memories and how he's processing his trauma. And she's trying to help him. So that's where we leave is he's just told her about this dream. And so Wakui is saying to him, think of all that you have accomplished since she died. You have so much to be proud of. Ashwiya, Shibanashi said, smiling sadly. That's his sister. I should have done so much better by her. You did the best you could. Shibanashi shrugged. It wasn't enough. Not just her, Wakui reminded him. You as well. He shook his head. I need something to help me sleep, he said. But if I give you something, you won't dream. Exactly. You must dream, she said. Without dreams, his spirit would be rooted to the physical world. Spirits need to be free to communicate between the world and the next, and dreams were the conduit. She stood and went to the shelves behind her. She dangled a branch wrapped in a circle with deer sinew threaded through it like a spider web. 3 feathers dangled from the bottom. But if you do need assistance. Chibanashi swatted the dream catcher away. I'm not a child, he sighed. And besides, I already have one. It does nothing. So you agree, Wakui said, that it's better to face the dreams than to block them. Please, he croaked out. If you try to keep the pain out, it will only appear to you more forcefully than before. You must confront it. Learn not to let it hold you hostage. She took a few padded footsteps toward him and knelt down. Remember the cycle of life. Wakui raised her hand up and pointed a finger straight between his eyes. Creation. She drew her hand down in half a circle. Destruction. She drew the other half of the circle and stopped her finger between his eyes again. Recreation. She drew the circle again, this time without pause. Your mind and your heart want to be here, she said, pointing at the top of this invisible circle. She dropped her hand to the bottom. But it's stuck here. It wants to rise. But it can't because your guilt weighs you down. To get from here, she pointed at the bottom, to here, she drew her finger up to the top, is the journey of life. It's a circle that repeats over and over. Destruction is meant to be recovered from. Recreation of something more beautiful and stronger than what existed before awaits you. But you have to be willing to make that climb. So the concept of creation, destruction, and recreation is a major theme in the book. It's a way of thinking about processing past trauma. I did not come up with that paradigm, though. That came from Ojibwa folklore and stories. And again, I was trying to put it into a modern, what I would consider like a modern context for readers who might not be familiar with it. So that's the book, such as it is. So any And I'll open it up to any questions if anybody has any. Yes.
Who's your favorite character?
Who's my favorite character?
And why?
And why? So when our hero Chibanashi gets to Shikakwa, he's met with a Miami tribe member named Tecumseh. And I wrote him to be Chibanashi's worst nightmare. He is very reserved, very traumatized. He doesn't say much. He definitely is not in touch with his feelings and isn't going to express them. And I thought, well, what's someone's worst nightmare? Probably me. Someone who talks a lot, someone who talks about their feelings, wants to know your feelings. And so I basically wrote, if a cat and a dog had to partner up to solve crime, that's how I wrote these two. Chibanashi being the cat who doesn't want to be petted, doesn't want a friend, and Tecumseh more like a dog. Hello, new best friend. You're my new best friend. Let's go be best friends. So he was my favorite to write because first off, I could write really long train of thought monologues, but also to kind of have them play off of each other. The other thing that I think is interesting about it is Chibanashi is really not good at his job, and Tecumseh is. And so you have someone who's not only really, really spectacularly annoying, he's also much better at your job than you are, which I think we can all relate to. But he was my favorite for that reason. Yeah. Yes.
Internet question. What ultimately motivated you to write a novel? Did you used to write before pursuing law?
So the question was, what made you want to write, and did you want to write before pursuing law? Absolutely, I did. Like most authors, I've wanted to be a writer since I was, as long as I can remember. I remember starting to write stories when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I would draw pictures of the characters and all of that. And before I always figured I probably couldn't make a living as an author, so I would need, a real job. So I always kind of in the back of my mind figured I'd go to law school, but in my undergrad, I started as a pre-med major and promptly washed out of the program and found myself after my first year of college with a not great GPA and a, what am I going to do now? I'm definitely not going to med school, not with these grades. And I'm dating myself, that this was back in 2003, and the 5th Harry Potter novel came out. And I remember I read that The Order of the Phoenix, and I read that 900-something page book in about a day and a half. And I thought, why am I doing anything else? Books are what I love. Reading is what I love. And I know if I major in English, I'll get A's without having to try very hard. But I also love it. Why am I doing anything else? And so I switched over to that and switched over to creative writing. And so I've written throughout. There were a number of years when I couldn't write because I was either in law school or taking the bar or becoming a junior lawyer or having kids. So, it's hard to do. It's hard to squeeze into a real life. And when you tell people I'm writing an alternate history novel, it's hard, if you aren't published or don't know if you ever will be, it's sometimes a hard thing to talk about. So, but it was always there in the background. And then when I had my second child, I thought, well, I'm definitely not getting any younger, so I should probably give this a go. And fortunately, I was able to do it. But one piece of writing advice that drives me nuts is they say you can't become a professional writer if you don't write every day. And I hate that. It's well-intentioned and it's not wrong, but if you don't have the capacity to write every day because you have a job, because you have kids, or you have, anxiety or other reasons you can't sit down and write, it's going to stop you from even trying. So I say, don't write every day, just write when you can. I certainly did. And I know that was unsolicited and not part of the question, but I always feel compelled to throw that in. You definitely don't have to write every day to get published, and I'm Exhibit A of that. Okay, yeah.
Your alternate history is based on your tribe's actual historical perspective of any of your relatives? How did you get the background of how your people really are?
The question is, how did I get the background of how the Ojibwe really are? So yes, I'm in touch with my relatives. There's my dad right there. He's Chippewa elder. And so I talked to a lot of my relatives. I talked to several of my uncles, my aunts, my cousins. You see a Chippewa funeral in the book that's based on my uncle's funeral. So it's something that you just kind of learn. But I also went to I know I've been told what sort of modern Ojibwa is. I was trying to recreate what might it look like if there had never been colonization. For example, the Ojibwa language we use in the book, that's different from the modern Ojibwa that's spoken today. I was able to work through the tribe with some of our First Nations speakers who said, modern Ojibwa has a lot of French in it. You want the never colonized stuff? And I was like, yes, give me that. That's what I want to hear. So talking to members of the tribe, I talked to some tribal board members, talked to family members, and then I went to try to find as many primary sources as I could. So I've got the bibliography back here, and I know if I don't look it up, I will miss some things. So the biggest one, I read 1491 by Charles Mann. That's a book about what the Americas were like before colonization, and it's very effective. It's a great book. Everyone should read it. It's nonfiction, but it reads like a novel. And the estimate in that book, and he's not alone in this, is that over 100 million people lived in the Americas, and upwards of 90% were killed by disease. So that was one that I looked at. I looked at the works of Basil Johnson and Andrew Blackbird and Francis Densmore, who are all Chippewa who are all Chippewa scholars and Chippewas themselves. Information from the Saginaw Indian Tribe of Chippewa's Zibiwing Center of Anishinaabe Culture and Lifeways. The Historical Atlas of Native Americans by Ian Barnes. That was very effective. I love maps. I think maps can tell you so much more than where things are. And what I loved about this book is it shows, decade by decade, century by century, where various peoples were located and how they shifted over time. So some of these are our best estimates, but that helped as well. And then if you see where tribes were and you look at you can also see who had conflicts. It was not peace and love between many tribes. The Lakota and the Chippewa in particular had a long history of dislike against each other going back. So I could go, there's a whole host of these, but I tried to give you, I guess, the less long-winded answer, primary source materials, talking to family members, and finding resources through the tribe of information about certain things, like the Menomin Festival that you see at the beginning of the book, the Wild Rice Festival. Much of that came from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewas information on Menomin harvests.
It's great that you have done this. I wish other members of tribe would come up with stories of their tribe, even if it's imagined and made up. It still will inform people about Native Americans and how they live or what their values are. But I don't think too many other people are doing it.
There's a great renaissance going on right now with Native American literature. I've been asked to either be a part of or list some of my favorite novels, and there are just so many great ones in the pipeline. So some of my favorite authors, Stephen Graham Jones, he's a horror writer. He writes some really good ones. Someone's applauding back there. He's great. Rebecca Roanhorse writes high fantasy based on pre-colonial Americas, as well as sort of a post-apocalyptic Navajo society. Louise Erdrich, she's also Ojibwa. She writes literary fiction. Her work, and she does more contemporary, modern literary works, and her work is fantastic. There's so many others. Cherie Demeline is a Métis author from Canada, and she has a couple of good ones, but my favorite is The Marrow Thieves. It's a young adult novel. It's a dystopia in which everyone but First Nations and Native American people has stopped dreaming. And dreams are very important in many cultures, but especially in ours, in Ojibwa. So that shows the impact of not being able to dream and going after Indigenous people who have a resource that they need. Where have we heard that before? So there's some, and Tommy Orange, who wrote There, that's a modern, and there's actually a quote from him at the start of the book about modern culture. But yes, I'm very excited that there's so many who are publishing. One of the pieces of feedback I got from an early reader is, I just love how the Chippewa have cell phones. And I was like, I'm a Chippewa with a cell phone. So we do exist. But I think there's a definite stereotype about where and how we live. I've always lived in cities. About 70% of other tribe members do. So it's a pleasure to be able to share to be part of one small part of this greater canon of Native people writing books. And I really I hope that I hope I'm not the last to write something like this, because I really want to see what other people could do with the concept of no colonization.
Is this a genre of book that you want to continue writing, or do you have aspirations of other areas of thought or interest?
So the question is this a genre I want to continue writing in? Yes, the second book will come out in May of next year. It's called The Mother, but it's sort of the mirror image of this one. It's set in a Europe that never had colonies, and you can see how European society starting in, basically I start with, what is Britain without the British Empire? And our heroes, we follow them from England to what we know as Belgium, to Germany, to France, and you can kind of see how different what we know as European powers look if they had never had overseas colonies. So yes to that one, and beyond that, I don't have any more ideas in this world. If anyone has any they want to share and want to let me use, I'd love to. But the next one I'm writing is a historical fiction set on a real event that happened in our world. So, but I hope I get more, because this was a really fun thing to do. Yeah. Yes.
So this one's very typical for authors. Pantser or plotter?
So for those who don't know, pantser means you sit down and you just kind of make up the book as you go along. Plotter means you outline it, you come up with the whole book, and then you start writing. I'm a lawyer, so I'm very much a plotter, but I have tried doing it the other way. I have found I do not like not knowing where things are going. I get lost in a corn maze and I get frustrated. So I'm very much, I guess I'm sort of in between. I certainly don't outline from the beginning, scene by scene, chapter by chapter, but I will have all the main sort of waypoints of the story mapped out. And then as I write, I'll flesh those out a bit more before I actually sit down and write them. But then sometimes I'll write and someone will do something I wasn't expecting, and I get mad and I have to throw my outline away and start again.
How long did it take to write the novel? How many drafts would you say you went through? And did any of your the members of your tribe to act as beta readers?
Okay, so how long did it take? The first draft was pretty quick. I was on a deadline. I was on maternity leave with my second child, and I'm very fortunate. This book would not have happened without progressive maternity policies. I had a 6-month paid leave. And I spent the first 3 months dealing with a colicky baby. And then the next 3, I thought, well, it's going to be now or never. So I decided by the time I go back to work, I would have a draft done. Didn't have to be a good one. I lost count of the number of drafts I've done on this book. From the very beginning, from when I finished the first draft to when it was published, there was about an 18-month gap. Is it 18 months? No, I think it's even longer than that, more like probably 20 months. And there were a lot of revisions along the way. So I could not tell you. It's in the double digits somewhere. And then did any people from my tribe act as beta readers? Yes. A woman from my tribe, Elizabeth Carrick, was a beta reader, and she was also our language consultant. But I wanted beta readers who I didn't know, because I wanted people who would have absolutely no reason to tell me they liked a book if they, if it's not good. So, and I thought, oh, my friends are way too nice. I love them, but they're not going to tell me if it's terrible. So I deliberately went outside and I sought out both native and non-native beta readers to get feedback, and that's what I did.
Were there any characters that either grew or shortened in importance in the novel from when you introduced them to your final draft?
Good question. One character was eliminated completely, and I gave their stuff to other people. There, I think Dakasin, the advocate, so she is Chibanashi's former love, who now lives in Chicago. She was a much smaller character when I first started writing the book, and she grew in importance as the book went on. And Tecumseh, as much as I thought, oh, I know exactly how much he's going to talk, nope, he just kept talking and talking. So he got a lot more pages just because he doesn't shut up. But yeah, largely the book is very much as it was when I planned it out. I tend toward underwriting, so I don't tend to need to cut very much. I usually have to add, and that's kind of what happened. All right, well, if there are not any others.
I have one more
Oh,
question
great.
myself. So, what would you love for people to come away after reading The Peacekeeper? What would you like them to hopefully impart from the book?
I guess so. The question is, what would you want people to impart from the book after reading it? I guess there's a few things. One is, in the criminal justice system, people who are the children of offenders, accused, are impacted by it as well. That's written from personal experience. We tend to get kind of lost in the shuffle, and so I don't mean to censor that experience, but it does tend to be sort of an afterthought. So that's one is, hey, we're here. The other is just thinking about, what might a world without colonization look like? My take on this is absolutely not the only one. I'm not the first person to do it. Like I said, I hope I'm not the last. Lots of ways this could have gone. And I've definitely heard from readers who would have taken it in a different way. And I'm like, great, I would love to see what you do with it, because this is not the only way to do it. So kind of just having that thought process and the idea of it didn't have to be this way. There was this viral map that was going around. Again, I really love maps. I'm sorry. There was a viral map that was going around a couple years ago where I forget, there was someone who has a blue check on Twitter, found an alternate map of the Americas that his daughter had made. And it was just very interesting how she had done it. And he said that he asked her, what made you draw a map like this? And she said, why don't people question the way that our map looks today? And I think that's a really good point. Didn't have to be like this. What should it look like? What could it look like? A million different ways to do it. So I guess that's the big thing I would want to impart from people is go have a fun thought experiment. It's fun.
Well, everyone, I would like to give B.L. Blanchard a hand, and congratulations on The Peacekeeper.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to everyone who's watching online. We're going to go ahead and go with our in-store signing portion of the event. Thank you for tuning in.